the Jewish Messiah doesn't appear within the next 216 years, it will prove that Judaism is in fact a false religion.
All right, let's see it.
Or at the very least, rabbinic Judaism is faulty. The Talmud and the Zohar are both in agreement that the Messiah must appear before the year 6000 on the Jewish calendar.
No, they actually flatly disagree about this. See, in Sanhedrin 97a in the Talmud, there's this statement that the earth will have a 6,000-year existence and then a 1,000-year day of rest, so a millennium day. And then the 6,000 years are divided into 2,000 years of desolation, 2,000 years of Torah that begins with Abraham, and then 2,000 years of the Mashiach. And ironically, that 2,000 years of the Mashiach, the Messiah, aligns somewhat closely with the rise of Christianity. So a lot of people said, oh, look at that, you're supporting Christianity. But what that means, according to the Talmud, is that once the third 2,000 years are up, the day of the Mashiach is over and the Mashiach didn't show up. The Zohar is completely different. The Zohar says that it is after the completion of the 6,000 years, and we see this in Zohar 1, 117a, and 2, 212b. After the 6,000 years are completed, then the Mashiach shows up. So they actually flatly disagree on this,
which is the year 2240 on the Gregorian calendar. This means that our great-grandchildren, or maybe even grandchildren, depending on how young you have kids, will live to see either the Jewish Messiah or the mass exodus from the Jewish religion whenever the Messiah does not appear.
No, there's not going to be any mass exodus. Judaism and Christianity and pretty much all religions that deal with prophecy have ways to digest failed prophecies and have been doing so for many, many years. In fact, Christianity started to grow after the failure of one of the initial prophecies about the coming of the Messiah within the religion. And Judaism has dealt with failed prophecies for a long time. In fact, the current traditional Jewish calendar is based on a correction to failed prophecy and errors in the scriptures. So the notion that we're still a couple hundred years away from the year 6000 is based on a renegotiation of how long the people of Israel were in Egypt. Because the traditional view is that they were in Egypt for 210 years. However, this flatly contradicts the Bible, and the Bible flatly contradicts itself. Because in Genesis 15:13, God told Abraham that his descendants would be enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. In Exodus 12:40, it says that the people of Israel were in Egypt for 430 years. But if they were in Egypt for 430 years, then it's already the year 2004 in the Jewish calendar. But everything had to be renegotiated back to 210 years. And one of the main reasons is because according to the explanation of who went down to Egypt with Jacob and his family, they couldn't possibly have been in Egypt for 430 years. Because the end of Genesis mentions Kohath going down to Egypt with the party of Jacob's family. Kohath was said to live 133 years. His son Amram was said to live 137 years. His son Moses was said to stand before Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go," when he was 80 years old. So even if Kohath entered Egypt when he was 1 day old and had his son Amram on the very last day of his life, and Amram had Moses on the very last day of his life, at most, they were in Egypt for 350 years, not 400, not 430. So there's a problem. And so there are a bunch of techniques that have been used to try to figure out, well, this must mean when they were in Canaan and also in Egypt, and do we start the clock when Abraham is given the promise, or do we start it at some other time? And basically they decided we're going to settle on 210 years. But if Exodus 12:40 is right, then we've already passed the year 2000 threshold.
Now, the Messianic age is actually sometimes referred to as the cosmic Sabbath.
According to the Talmud, the cosmic Sabbath comes after the Messianic age. It is only within the Zohar that the Messianic age corresponds with the cosmic Sabbath.
Now, this is all very interesting. However, it's important to note that there is a discrepancy amongst secular scholars and Jewish scholars on the actual year that we are in on the Hebrew calendar. Modern historians tally 14 Persian kings which ruled over the Jewish people, whereas Jewish historians tally only 4. If modern historians are correct, this would mean that we are in the year 5991 on the Hebrew calendar, meaning that the Messianic age is ever more imminent.
To my knowledge, this discrepancy wouldn't actually change the calculation of the current year. It just changes where we place certain events in the chronology. So, for instance, most scholars believe that the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 587 BCE, but the Seder Olam might place it in like 422 BCE. But that doesn't actually change the calculation of the year. It just changes where we place those events on the timeline. But I am open to being corrected about this. And the fit for this video has been the Spawn #1 cover.